Do some review to get back to where we were before moving into what is probably the central dimension of this seminar, the origin of responsibility. That's what we're preparing ourselves for. As you remember, I began with the 8 difficulties, which I will just review briefly, since we're facing these difficulties all the time, but they're going to come back now. We have to look at why they're in play in Levinas's philosophy as an ethic. So we're thinking the ambiguity of what is wisdom, and now that we're going to enter into the face of the other, we know why there's an ambiguity about wisdom. There are different approaches to the face of the other. What Buber called the I-thou, which is the I-it. Right? A distinction much too harsh for Levinas, from a nuanced approach to that. We know we're doing a phenomenology because Husserl expanded science, the notion of evidence, which was its true nature, which had been lost in the rational period, which opted for quantification because of the power and success of a quantitative approach. Then we know, and today we will see, that the phenomena, the evidence, shows us something that doesn't even fit into the framework of evidence. And that will be the face of the other. That will be a rupture. There will be a rupture. We've just started even. And that this will force us to break with the very structures of formal logic. And that will force us into a peculiar manner of speaking, a kind of oblique or tracing that is different, insofar as we are philosophers, to try to capture what it is that goes on in the livingness of the face relation. We will also then have a better sense of the elusive style of Levinas. Now, it's not necessary to have this elusive style, but there's already, as it were, an illusion in the most direct speech. Isn't that correct? There's an illusion. But what Levinas will do is also allude laterally to 6 signs, signs that have developed in our civilization, and ultimately this would include global civilization if there ever is such a thing. I distinguish between, once we enter into ethics, the temptation of temptation, which leads us to a different kind of discourse of freedom, as opposed to difficult freedom. And today we'll see why there is a difficult freedom. But the key element I want to return to in terms of the difficulties is the shift to what I call contemporary thought as opposed to classical thought. That is non-dualist thought. And this is going to be the framing, the central framing today of ethics. A turn to language, the body, history, and time. Taking them seriously. So when Levinas says there's an excellence in time that would be lost in eternity. And this leads me to a transition, and I'm thinking about Spinoza, and what Spinoza says about babies. Jim reminded us of a statement in the symposium. It was probably the most shocking statement in the symposium, when Diotima says, in the voice of Socrates, that she's a woman, who would not rather have the children of intellect, of the mind, of Homer, as it were, than real flesh and blood babies. And I'm thinking, I don't know anyone like that. Actually, I do know people like that. And it seems something disturbing about it, to be in love with ideas. I thought love had to do with loving people. And Martha Nussbaum points out a serious problem in the symposium. I had been taught, because I had one of these Straussian teachers, that the real debate in the symposium was between Socrates and Agathon, that is, between aesthetics and philosophy. Nussbaum says the real debate is between Socrates and Alcibiades. And the point here in the debate, which is unresolved, Socrates doesn't have a solution, is that Socrates, when you learn from Alcibiades, you can even lie next to him naked. You know, Alcibiades is the most tempting, handsome, beautiful man, powerful, rich, recognized. It's the Marilyn Monroe with Einstein's brain, wants to sleep with Socrates, lies naked with him, and Socrates is cold as a log. He's worthless. Socrates cannot love, in other words, an individual person. Because there's no person more desirable than Alcibiades. We know from Diotima speech that he only starts with the particular. The particular is simply an occasion to move to the general. And then you go to the general of the general, and you get the form of the good, and which is what you can love. But the price of loving ideas is you don't love people. Or you love them ironically. Or you love them minutically. But there's no babies. Alcibiades, on the other hand, has the same problem from the reverse direction. Alcibiades, who comes in looking like Dionysus himself, with the garland of flowers on his leaves on his head. He's drunk. He's got the flute girls. This is Mr. Party Animal, the Brad Pitt of his day. Actually, Brad is a happily married man. So let's, I don't know what other example you want, but he's the party animal. He comes in, and he admits that he's tortured because, having met Socrates, he has a love for ideas, and he knows that ideas are worthwhile, but he can't help himself. The particulars drag him away from ideas. So he loves this woman this night, this man that night, this woman the next night. No constancy. It's the Dionysian frenzy. So he is the body without the mind, the Deleuzian body, if you will. Socrates is the mind without the body. And it's unresolved. This is not resolved inside of the symposium. And Nussbaum has pointed this out very eloquently. The solution, by the way, is Plato himself. Plato is the solution. It's dialogue. Dialogue is the combination, as we see in Levinas. We're going to see Levinas as the solution to this problem of bringing together these dualisms through ethics, as it turns out. But you can see this also in Spinoza when he says, he says the nastiest things about babies, Spinoza. He says, well, first let me say this, because I want to come back to the notion, I'm still reviewing what we've done, of being created, which is another way of saying being born. Right? And we talked about the uterine ilia, and then the notion of jouissance. The image was the fresh baby. Right? So Spinoza says in Proposition 68, or Part 4 of the Ethics, if men were born free, they would form no conception of good and evil, so long as they were free. Isn't it astonishing how Levinas identifies Spinoza as the antipodes of his thought? If men were born free, which is to say they were not born, they're caused. If men were caused and not born, they would have no conception of ethics. And then we have this wonderful remark by, this wonderful idea by Spinoza, that once you get into your head, you'll never lose it. In Part 5, in the Scholium to Proposition 6, he says, this is great, he says, we see that nobody pities a baby because it cannot talk or walk or reason, and because it spends many years in a kind of ignorance of self. But if most people were born adults, and only a few were born babies, then everyone would feel sorry for babies. Isn't that a great idea? If most people were born full-blown, like Aphrodite, and only some with these gooky things you had to take care of for what, 15 years, we would be disgusted. You would be ashamed to have such a thing. You know, what's wrong with you? It's defective. You know, and this is Spinoza's idea. Now, the Levinasian counter-thought, which we'll come to today, is this incubation, as it were, is the production of a being capable of ethics. This vulnerability is the precondition of ethics. So Spinoza realizes that, and he wants to eliminate it. He says this also in the Scholium to Proposition 39 of Section 4. He says, what have we to say about babies? A man of advanced years believes their nature to be so different from his own that he could not be persuaded he had ever been a baby. This is, until Freud, this was certainly the case, right? Freud has forcefully reminded us that we are everything in our whole development, always, still, even though we try to become responsible adults. Levi-Strauss will show us that development is a precondition for becoming a responsible adult. In fact, the new thought I want to inject regarding this, and I wish Lin-Ma were here, is that the famous, mysterious Section 4 of Totality and Infinity is precisely the account of the development of a being capable of responsibility. That's what that's about. It's the, as it were, the childhood, the adolescence, because humans at some point are not responsible beings. We grow into responsibility, we are taught responsibility, it's part of our engagement in the human community, and at some point we become adults. And at some point you can no longer excuse your irresponsibility because of your childhood. But there it is, he lays it out. It's why it's so difficult, this section, because it's not quite a being capable of responsibility. It's being brought up by beings capable of responsibility. It's what Aristotle spoke of as character development. This is character development, right? But maybe one time we'll have a summer seminar entirely on that topic. It doesn't interest me as much, probably bad influence of Spinoza, but I think that's the role there. So, looking at this contemporary thought, I now want to think about ethics in the various registers, because Raymond yesterday gave us a list of 7 features of the face, but I am going to be, I'm going to say that I'm going to look at it somewhat differently. I'm going to start with what we've done, the body as self-sensing. So I'm going to do the level of the body. I'm going to start with another level will be time. We now have time as the instant and self-presence. Right? I'm going to look at language. We know language so far is representation. Right? The representation of property, the Nietzschean view of language coming out of an economics. We have no history yet. History has not come into play. But I want to talk about these 4 levels, and then we have to add a 5th now, because this is the key to all of Levi-Strauss, ethics. Right? So I want to talk about the contemporaneity, or the truly Levi-Straussian thought, the character of the phase, across these 5 layers of interrelated meanings and reconfigurations of what we're coming in with now, which is already a rather mature concept. This is it. Let me come back to it. Okay. So let me, forgive me, I'm going to make a drawing. Let's see. I think Horace was telling me, I was saying how I don't do these kind of PowerPoint or audio or visual things. And you were saying to me that you had found it very useful at some point, the drawings, about Marxism.
No, it wasn't me.
Who was it? Someone was. I was telling someone how I pride myself in never using this stuff,
well, only those people have no points and no power will use PowerPoint. Like I did this. You have power, you have points. Don't use it.
See it, but I know it. Let me now see you win if you come out weaker than me. You see, that's
it's okay.
I know this trick. I know this trick. Right. My kids do this. They learned enough from me that when they argue with us, they'll say, Austrian, they'll say, calmer than you. Calmer. You know, like, they win if they're calm.
Okay.
So I'm going to give a general picture of just. I think this is useful for what I called the fourfold. We have a Heideggerian fourfold. It's not the fourfold of Heidegger. But actually, I forget the word I use. I should come up with a good word for this business of two separate terms, unlike one another, and two relations between these terms, unlike each other, the asymmetry, right? So it's a fourfold. So here we have, as we know, the other, and it's more complicated than that, the other, and the I. So here's the four relations, the four things. We have the term of the I, the term of the other, the relation of the other to the I, the relation of the I to the other. It's more complicated because we also have a relation of the other to others. Right. This is why Levinas's thought doesn't lend itself to those simple, oh, it's this opposition, or it's this triad. It's not even a fourfold. It's all the complications are doubled in the fourfold by the relation to the others. So, just to put a couple of broad claims here, we could say this is the first person, and I'm thinking here of the I, right? And then this would be the second person, because this is the you, right? And then we know the third. This is the third person. This is the he, she, it.
Third party.
The third party. So this is the third. Which he uses eleity. We can say he uses the word the he. That's how it translates into English, not it. Now just to put one thing on it, but we're going to come back and I'm going to go through this general chart in all four registers because it has different senses and we can sort them out in each register. We could say that this relation of the other to me is anterior to my relation to the other, which is posterior. And now we're getting into time already, but it's also going to carry weight in ethics and everything. Now this relation, what I've written on the board, cannot be made sense of unless we start by understanding that its ultimate sense is ethical. Otherwise it collapses. The only thing that keeps this relation open, we can't just say, oh, it's diachronous time. Why is it diachronous time? It's diachronous time because it's an ethical relation. So let's start by filling in new words in this general picture, and I'm not going to, I should be getting up each time and giving you a new chart, to see this thing ethically. So, the other, in the ethical relation, the so-called face, right? What is a face, the absolute alternative of the other? We were discussing this yesterday as we were debating this great insight for me, and I hope for all of us that I have no face, that the face of the other is simply obligating. The face says, I now have obligations. It's imperative. I am obligated to and for the other. The other obligates me. That's all the face is. I mean, at the bottom, we're going to have to explain what this means temporally, what this means in terms of the body, what this means in terms of history, but that the piercing difference, and we know this. The example, the illustration I always give to my students is the difference between walking into a room when you think you're the only person in the room, and I mean, we know, of course, the face is always present in Levinas. It's not a matter of someone being in front of you or not, but this illustrates, I think, the difference in the world between walking in a room when no one's there, you think no one's there, and then discovering someone's there. Completely different room, right? You feel like you've been caught out, right? You're now seen. And you are under a different structure, right? You now have obligations to that other person, right? So while you might have come in and started taking all your clothes off, my God, there's someone in the room. I have to show a little modesty, right? It alters your entire way of being. So the first step, which is what comes second, we'll see from another point of view when we look at time, is the introduction of obligation into the world, which is what Levinas calls the face. Now this obligation comes from dogs, this obligation comes from plants, this obligation comes from rocks, but it initially and primarily, in its most extreme phenomenological or not phenomenological, enigmatic sense, comes from the face of others, other human beings. That's the original source, as it were. Because Levinas is not some kind of fundamentalist religious figure. He's very much against ontotheology. He does not believe this comes to us because some God broke into the skies and a voice said you should love one another. No. For Levinas, the Ten Commandments are written on the face of the other. That is where we learn, that's the first place of thou shalt not murder. But it's also the first place of thou shalt listen. Right? So, in the face, starting with this obligating other, what am I? Well, I can refuse the other. Of course, I can refuse the other. But already in that phase, I have responsibilities. What I am refusing are responsibilities. I am now constituted, when I say now, this is how I've always been once I enter adulthood, or if you want to look at section 4, in the feminine presence, that is, where we're not yet there, you could say, I am developmentally becoming the sort of person that as an adult, what we call a person as an adult, is I take on my responsibilities. I know that I have them. I could be irresponsible. I could be responsible. But I am now that being whose being, as it were, is a for the other. I am for the other now. I am now my body, as we knew which was the instant. We'll go through all the different layers, right? Is a trauma, but I'll save that for now because now I just want to talk about the ethical structure of this relation. I am now responsibility, and that's why I say, as I discovered in front of you, as we all worked out together, that I would say I am not a face. The other is the face, and the face is obligating. I am responsible. Actually, I'm irresponsible. I'm always irresponsible. Yes.
Can I ask?
Yeah, please.
You said that I'm obligated towards the dog and the rocks.
Yes.
That's very strange to me. In the context of the ethical relationship. It's kind of a remark. I mean, can you maybe
I will.
expand on it? Because I really
Right.
strikes me a little.
Because
right.
when Levinas says ethics is first philosophy,
Yeah.
he means ethics precedes ontology.
Yeah, that's
But
good.
that means all those things that we would have categorized in ontological relations are originally ethical relations. So the relation to the dog occurs within a context that is human in the sense that it has to do with morality. So that in other words, that you can't, for Levinas, I'm just suggesting that, I mean, I might be wrong, but I'm suggesting that for Levinas, you cannot separate a domain out and say, oh, this is not part of this.
No, that's
Right,
clear. It's
right.
just that maybe it's, the problem is only with the wording. Maybe I understand
yeah.
the same. I will say the way I would prefer to phrase it. I'm the only way I can say I'm obligated towards the dog or the rock or whatever, or anything of the material world. Computer, yeah. It's insofar as it is part, or the possession actually, that's the very nice word, of the other human being.
And it is.
That's another thing, but
That's
if
it.
we qualify that, then I don't have a problem.
But Levinas is saying it's not the case that it's first has its own independent being, and then we can say, let's treat it morally. He's saying, no, initially, already, from the start, without any escape, the computer operates as a being within the context of moral obligations. So we know
To the other people
to
rather
the-
than to the computer.
starting through the other people.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely starting through the other
Exactly,
people.
because I just wanted to qualify that because the initial, the way you said it, it might be taken that, you know, I have obligation to this thing, but actually I don't as such. I
Good
can,
point, yes.
I mean, it's expensive, but otherwise I could just throw
No,
it down. and
because
destroy it.
your point is very well,
Yeah.
and we should underline your
It's
point.
always qualified in
Right.
relation to the other.
Yes,
So
we should underline
strictly
it.
speaking,
Yeah.
there is only one obligation, and it is to the other human being.
Right, but that obligation.
Then we agree.
Yeah, good, because I want to emphasize that that obligation extends everywhere, and the reason we need to do that is
Insofar as it's
because of
human
the,
world. Yeah.
yeah, but also because the thing you said that maybe you felt I might have got it, saying it wrong, is not an accident,
Mhm.
because the Heideggerian philosophy is based on that alternative reading. The Heideggerian appropriation of Aristotle is that when I see a piece of wood, the wood somehow demands from its own internal structure or energy, or the chicken requires that it be cut in certain places. And Levinas says, he's saying, this requirement to cut the chicken in certain places because we humans are going to eat it. And he doesn't mean that in the sense of an instrumental, he means that in the sense of an ethical. That is, I start treating
that's true, it's important. There is a clear break between these two traditions.
Yes.
For Levinas, of course, it would be interesting to maybe to attack Levinas at this point, because one of the strange things about Levinas, if we qualify that, one of the strange things, kind of coming from the common sense perspective, if you allow me that, is that, you know, why only a human being is an ethical agent, an ethical subject. I know all the story kind of, but I think it's still a valid question to ask.
No, it is. It's something I have raised against the deep ecologists. Because I think the very conditions, I mean, because I am Levinasian, the very conditions for the alternative position are Levinasian. And they have to defend themselves. That is, if they wish to defend the independent status of nature, we should have preserves. Why, I ask? Why is that? And why don't you just let nature nature, like Spinoza thought? Just let nature nature. Because the ascending. By the way, I found it was letter 23, where someone writes to Spinoza. We don't have the original letter of what they wrote to Spinoza, but someone wrote to Spinoza, what if someone's essence is to commit suicide? And Spinoza admits, he says, if that was their essence, that is their ascending, their conatus, then, no, they say hang themselves. That's what they said in the letter. So he says they should hang themselves. And then he says, and then also it goes further, because Spinoza then, to make this point striking, he said if their conatus was to be a knave, that is an evil person, he said they should be a knave. That is, he doesn't back off.
I think what he's trying to do here is he's trying to say that every being has to remain faithful to its conatus.
Exactly.
But he defines this conatus very well in ethics, and he says that the conatus of every being is to strive to maintain its own being for as long as possible. And it is he even says that it is contradictory that a being could entail the idea of its own finitude. So I would say he gives an ironical answer.
No.
He says, okay, if your conatus is to commit suicide, then I have nothing to say. But I've explained what conatus is. I mean, you can't override it. This idea of conatus is very strong in the ethics. You cannot simply override it.
No, the argument is not to override it. The argument is to say, if your conatus is to commit suicide, just as the conatus of a plant that is an annual of a flower is to grow that year and go away. It's gone. There's no question that in nature things end. So the question is simply, if someone's nature is to end and hang themselves, and I don't think it's ironic at all, or tongue in
But this
cheek.
is self-contradictory.
But you see, if you just say it's self-contradictory, what is that? You're just imposing that framework? Then your Parmenidean perspective comes too much to the surface.
But because I think it's self-contradictory in the sense it can't be, being's essence cannot be not be.
Precisely.
That's the question which is raised.
But you can say that it's to be what it is. And what it is
it's to be. No, it's not to disappear.
To hang itself.
Precisely.
It can't be the essence of the essence of a being can't be to disappear.
To suspend its own being. The essence of a being has to be
It's
to
still
maintain
there.
its own
It's
being.
contradictory. I see both points at
He
least.
can't have his cake and eat it. He can't say everything's necessary and everything's good at the same time. He calls it ethics to make us think that's how it's going to play out. But the true Spinoza is Sade. Because Sade does everything according to nature. Everything. That's his whole argument. Sade is one of the great philosophers. You know, I mean, when I say he's a great philosopher, I don't mean he's easy to read. I mean, he spent 30 years in prison for his philosophy. He could have got out. He refused to compromise. I don't think there's ever been a philosopher with more integrity other than Socrates than Sade. And when I compare Nietzsche to Sade, I see the cowardice of Nietzsche. Right? Now, again, he's not easy to read, and you don't want to be recommending this to your children. But who didn't think that philosophy was risky? But I don't see how you could get out of the Sadean Spinozism. It's too good to have you say, oh, it's all going to come out good. Why is it all going to come out good? Why should it come out good? It's going to come out really messy if you just go by necessity. People, when they think of nature, think of beautiful sunsets. What about tsunamis? I mean, nature is a horror show.
Well, if you look at in detail, but if you see the greater scheme of things, which Spinoza would say, then you can understand that there's nothing that can be wrong.
That's the
Spinoza's
point. Nothing
the
is wrong.
substance
So
is
if you're supposed to hang
everything,
yourself,
it's
hang yourself. Nothing can be wrong. There's nothing wrong with hanging yourself. That's what Spinoza's saying.
Yeah,
There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with hanging yourself.
No, Spinoza says it is wrong with hanging yourself because
A
it's,
human being is.
yeah, because this means that you suffer from an Spinoza would say from a deficiency.
Those who commit suicide are of weak spirit and are completely overcome by external causes
Precisely.
opposed to their nature.
Exactly.
That's why the guy wrote them the letter. Because of that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And he had no answer.
I think his answer was ironical. I would go with that. Spinoza put his...
Then there's no, how can you discuss things then? If his answer was, how do you know? There's nothing ironic about it. If you look at the letter, there's nothing. Because he goes on to say about this knavery. That, but why should it be the case that suicide would be ruled out? Why do you get your Christian ethics and your necessity?
But it's only there. He puts it clearly. Because the others take over us. The others limit us, and we understand ourselves from the others instead of going on and on with our own being.
You're assuming death is a bad thing. That's not a bad thing.
No, it's not me. It's
Internal
Spinoza who's
nature,
assuming
death
that.
is not bad.
Well, that's
That's
confession.
contradictory. It's contradictory.
If my nature is to kill others, then how?
That's his point. He's saying about the knavery, and this movie, Natural Born Killers, that's Spinozism. My nature is to be a killer, I kill. Don't blame me, don't give me your moral lesson. This is my nature. That's Spinoza. And that's why I say Sade is the real Spinoza.
I don't.
I think it's
Spinoza is not prescribing that it shall be like that. We have no option. Human agency, there is no relevance for human agency. The law of the nature is like that. We could not help that. And he is not prescribing that we should be like that. But
Right.
this is the fact.
Exactly.
Precisely. This is the fact that we
No
are
moral
like this.
judgment.
We are
No moral
disconnectors.
judgment.
And disconnectors that defines us. We have no power over disconnectors. Disconnectors means that we continuously strive to maintain our
It's not
own
we
being.
strive, actually it's nature strives through us. It's not we strive.
Yeah, that's right.
That's
That's
like
right. This is
it's
right.
Nature
objective.
might want the dissolution of that entity that you call Richard Cohen. That maybe nature wants that.
No, it's not possible because
Why is it not possible?
the dissolution of this of
If it
a
wants the
person.
dissolution of the dinner I eat, the dinner I eat is dissolved, it's gone. Why shouldn't it want the dissolution of...
Okay, but the dissolution of anything would mean the opposite of an intensification, the opposite of
It's not the opposite. Remember I said there's no death in Spinoza.
Intensification.
Yeah, there's no death. There's no death.
Yes.
Circulation.
It's just circulation.
Yeah.
Circulation in nature.
Deleuzian, circulation.
Yeah.
Deleuze loves Spinoza.
Yeah, too.
Right. Nietzsche loves Spinoza.
Spend one book on Spinoza.
Yeah. Nietzsche loves Spinoza.
It's the meaning of the famous line, it's in Latin, but I can't.
Well, thinking about it.
Not to cry, not to protest, but to understand.
Not to cry, not to protest, but to understand.
And I'm not translating it, right? I can't remember the Latin.
Okay.
But
Anyway.
it's to conform yourself.
Don't
Yeah,
get
it would.
judgmental.
Why should it come out with our
morality.
Ten Commandments? I don't. Anyway, let's go on. So the point was not to say, and it's easy to be tempted that objects are there and then we give them a moral gloss. Everybody else is saying, and this is a wild thought, that entities are what they are, insofar as they are already part of an ethical context and could not be anything else. So that you know that if you destroyed your computer, we do this as kids, like when you destroy the toy, and your mother says, oh, your brother could have had that, or so-and-so could have had that. Actually, you really enjoy destroying it, so you knew that they couldn't have it. But when you destroy your computer, you're thinking, somebody else could have used your computer, right? Somebody else could have used it. That is, and if I take this rock that might have had some mineral that would have been of some value, say, and then I'm doing something wrong, or if I'm poisoning the environment, or the whole environmental movement is Levinasian to my mind, that you mistreat nature, animals are going to suffer, humans are going to suffer, that is the suffering. We are part of the suffering of nature. We're not part of nature in the Spinoza sense. That is everything has repercussions everywhere, because that's true too for Spinoza. The slightest movement in one place affects the entire universe. But Levinas is saying, no, the priorities that we have extend over everything. Nothing is free of those priorities. That is, we're all in this net of obligations. And yeah.
I think it's humanist, the environmental movement just in general. It makes sense only to the extent that, well, we have to care about nature because we need to survive.
That would be one.
Otherwise, otherwise for me it doesn't make sense at all.
There's that utilitarian reading because we're living in the age of business. It's not the age of technology, the age of business.
But also I agree with it because when they say we should save planet Earth, I'm pretty sure it will exist without us. It doesn't,
Right.
The only thing which we need is the conditions in which we can survive. That's why we care about it. I don't know what's happening on Mars now with this curiosity thing. Maybe there's an ecological catastrophe that no one really cares. Ecology makes sense only when humans
But it's not really
Or
self-interested because you don't know who will be after us. It is like even you just consider for humanity, it's not just me, it's we.
No, that's what I said. It's environmental ethics, all the movement in general.
So it's
makes
not
sense
business.
as
It's not
humanist.
No, I'm saying it's not business. I'm saying that we're prone to that interpretation.
But it's humanist, I would say, because there's a lot of movements there, and there's certainly Levinasian inspired movements from what I know about environmental movements and what's happening there. But in general, it always has this human dimension. It's this nature is for us, and that's why we have to preserve it, because we need it, otherwise we won't survive. There's no other...
Absolutely.
There's no other sense to it, and I agree with it.
But the question is, what is the meaning that we need it? What is the true meaning of possession? So,
there's
where Levinas comes in.
Yeah, there are a few possibilities.
Yeah.
That's not all environmental movement will agree with Lenin.
No, they haven't
It's
read
just
it.
a survival. Okay, good.
No, okay. The biblical story of the Tower of Babel is an enigma in the Bible because it never tells you why the tower has to be destroyed. It doesn't actually say, oh, they're overreaching, right? It just says they're building a tower up to heaven. It sounds like a great idea. Build a tower to heaven. What a wonderful thing. God should be happy. In the Jewish tradition, there is a secondary literature called Midrash, which is meant to be the stories that were left out, and of course, from a historical, critical point of view, these are much later stories. Nevertheless, they are interpreted as to fill in what's missing. So, in the rabbinical tradition, what was the prime Tower of Babel? Was that when they were building it, if a workman fell off, it was no big deal. But if someone dropped bricks off, that was a big deal. You would be punished for that. And Levinas interprets this. It's an obvious interpretation. That's why the rabbis came up with this midrash, that you're valuing things more than people. So that in terms of that economic model, the pure business model, we can see right away that we would sacrifice money for lives, or we're hoping we're living in a world where we would sacrifice lives for money. So when that plane from Korea did this crash landing in San Francisco, I'm sure it cost a heck of a lot more money putting out those fires, sending those emergency trucks out there, shutting the airport, than that airline was ever going to recover, which is why stock crashed the next day in the stock market.
Yeah.
But we are all thinking, forget the expense, help the people, right? Now that's the lesson of the Tower of Babel. So
There's a counterexample. I mean, any of the invasions of the last 10 years of the US, I mean, the amount of people killed during the wars. I'm not saying it was done for money. Of course, I'm not claiming that. I'm pretty sure they're checking my.
now you're being ironic. Oh, you're being ironic.
Yeah.
Cynical.
Right.
No, but
No, actually,
yeah,
the
that
first
is-
Iraq War, even in America, was pretty transparent. We were not in there to say, give democracy to Kuwait. We were in there to keep the price of oil affordable. And that was the debate, is it worth it? Right, are human lives worth keeping the price of, it's because the American economy would have collapsed, the global economy would have collapsed. But,
Yeah.
no, remember that Levinas says, when we talk about ethics, what little justice there is in the world. Levinas has no illusions about the world being just. So, so now I'm in the process of giving the ethical reading of this structure, which, by the way, has no independence. There's no independent structure, right? The ethics is what makes it possible for me to think through this structure. Jake?
Just before I move on, I'm confused about where we left off with the idea of ecology in Levinas, because so far, I think you've only given like a negative account of the Spinozistic model of nature. And you said that the onus is on the deep ecologists to say why we should not just let nature in nature. So I'm asking you why should we let nature in nature? Why should we give it this? Why should we let it be?
Because the suffering of animals in and of itself is a bad thing. It is independent of any financial benefit, any, that just as the suffering of another human being. That is, the suffering of an animal obligates us. So these analytic philosophers that look at the suffering animal say, can I interpret these gestures and signs as suffering? Are they not just signs in a signifying system of which I am unaware? It's insane, because they're always operating at the level of said. So that
But I thought that what you were saying was that we should let nature in nature.
No, I'm opposing that. I'm opposing the Spinozist.
I thought you said that the onus was on deep ecologists to say why we should not let nature in nature.
Want to say that again?
You said the onus was on the deep ecologists to prove to you why we should not just let nature in nature. But maybe you.
Well, the deep ecologist is claiming that there's a kind of something beyond a kind of human value system.
Yeah.
Right, as if there's a value derived from nature.
So they have the onus is on them to describe, okay, what is that?
What is the value they're getting allegedly from nature?
Right, I understand that point, but it seems like when you make that point, then you're just saying, you're making a reason why we don't have to interact. Like, if there's no human value.
I'm trying to suggest, I hope if I was not articulating it in a way that was clear, that we are already morally obligated to, there is no nature. There is no nature. There's a world of obligations. And some of those obligations will be to plants, some to rocks, some to animals, and we will, at the level of justice, which I'm just about to talk about, the level of justice, we're going to be forced to set up a hierarchy. So the hierarchy in and of itself is not bad. It's only bad when it detaches itself from its moral roots, right? So that this is the other dimension that comes in when I'm doing the ethical. The ethical characterization of what I actually have derived from ethics is that because there are others than the other, and remember I was calling this stuff morality in my terminology, and I wish Levinas was the one had been using this terminology, and I'm calling this justice. So that, and they're both happening simultaneously, so that in the sense of the third party, I have an obligation to all others, but that obligation to all others, because the other that I'm facing is subject to the harm that others could bring to that other. I can't be oblivious to that. So that as much as I can help the other, I must also protect the other from the harm that others could bring. So I need laws, I need a police force, we need armies, we need all the institutions, the courthouse. What is a courthouse all about? And so the two people who disagree can civilly solve their disagreement by determining who is adhering closer to the law. The law, like Socrates said, when given the opportunity to flee prison and escape his official punishment, he said this was a legal punishment. He said, I had my whole life to protest and this legal system, And I have adhered to this legal system, except the one instance when he refused to, actually he followed the law, and the tyrants were not following the law, when they wanted him to bring someone in for a murder case that wasn't actually a murder case, it was a political assassination. So it was, he didn't fulfill the legal injunction, but he was certainly willing to face the consequences. He thankfully didn't have to until he was very, very old. He was 70 at that time, 70 was very old. So Levinas is saying that, so we have this legal system to address the problems that occur in terms of people treated as equal to one another. So that the formula, the final ultimate formula, the ethical formula in Levinas would be that beyond the for itself, I am for the other, that I'm responsible to the other obligates me. Morality is that that justice corrects morality. It's a rectification of morality. Remember, if I give everything to one person, I'm denying others, so that morality must be rectified. I can tell you the messianic aim of Levinasians, because the messianic comes in here, and I'll say why it's the word messianic. The aim is to have a society where you can give everything to one person without hurting anyone else. Without hurting anyone else.
Peace.
Where you can have a society where you can be moral without injustice. A society where you can be moral without injustice. And remember how difficult it is to be moral in Levinas. That is, to be moral is to make sure that the needs of the other are provided for, the material needs. The food, the clothing, the education, the job, the medical attention, so that I can provide all this for the one facing me, and no one else would be denied. That is the goal, as it were, the end. Now, why do I call it messianic? Why is messianic the word? Unfortunately, in current terminology, at least in Israel, the messianic people are often militant fundamentalists, so I do not mean that. And also I have to put aside a certain Christian reading of messianic, because in Christianity the Messiah already came. So it's as if we're living in the kingdom of heaven if I bring in the message. So you have to think of second coming here. But in Judaism, the Messiah has not come. So the use of the term, why is shifted in the language of religion, of messianic, rather than the political language of idealism? This is a political ideal. Well, the problem with political ideals is you claim to know now what will be necessary in the future in its particulars. Let me step back and say another statement that I think is very useful about the whole ethical picture in Levinas. Justice without morality is tyranny. Right? And morality, I've said this before, morality without justice is sentimental. Right? So this is one of the problems we have with forgiveness. Because if I'm a forgiving person, well, I might be causing enormous harm. Right? Pacifist, as far as I'm concerned, pacifism is a harmful position. Because it's non-resistance to other people's evil that we have to, in that famous line at the end of Otherwise Than Being, Levinas says, I'm sorry, this is so gigantic, the ethics, but I'm going to take the time to come back and look at the body and the other ones, and then we can discuss it, because I know this is really the topic of our seminar. This great line at the end of Otherwise Than Being, where he says, page 177, 177, Otherwise Than Being, on the top of the page, the true problem for us Westerners is not so much to refuse violence as to question ourselves about a struggle against violence, which, without blanching in non-resistance to evil, could avoid the institution of violence out of this very struggle. Point being that Levinas will distinguish good violence and bad violence. Bad violence is simply violence for the sake of violence, selfish violence, appropriation, concupiscence, my place in the sun, I could care less about you. Good violence is the attempt to eliminate bad violence. And we know from Catholic theology the just war theory. Just war theory is an instance of accounting for good violence against bad violence. That is, in what instance could a war be just? How great does the evil have to be so that we are not turning the other cheek, we are doing something violent about it. And we are justified, and we are required morally or people trying to justice to do something about it. There's the, let me just, okay, ask one.
No.
The thing is that I want to put a lot of stuff on the table, that's all. Okay, good. Okay, so, it's messianic as opposed to an idealism, because the word messianic means you don't know how to get there. That is, people are awaiting the Messiah because they don't know how to get to the Messiah. So I distinguish two levels here, principle and policy in terms of justice. The principle of justice is what I just said, a world where you can be moral without injustice. But as to the particular policy that we need to institute today in our unjust world, that's a matter of debate. Open debate. We don't know exactly. Is it good to have a national health care plan, or is it not good to have a national health care plan? I assure you, on all these political debates, however heated they are, in almost every case, your opponent agrees in the same principles that you do. Right? Your opponent is saying, no, what I'm saying will bring us to a just society. And you're saying, how can you say that? What I'm saying will bring you to a just society. Right? So we agree on the absolute principles. Murder is bad, violence is bad, justice is good. What we argue about are the policies that will get us where we want to go, the policies that will work today. That's why Levinas will support, again, at the level of ethics, which includes morality and justice, liberal democracy. He's explicit, supports liberal democracy. Now, I think it would have been more correct to say the term liberal social democracy. Right? Because nowadays, with neoliberalism, when you hear liberal democracy, it's losing the sense that it had in terms of liberals versus conservatives, and it's now meaning conservatism. So liberal is being taken over by the neoliberals, that is, by the neoconservatives. So it means confusing economic self-interest with the commonwealth, with the political well-being. So what Levinas is talking about is liberal in the sense that it respects the integrity of the individual so that you have morality, right? We've been talking about the separated being. The being is not absorbed in the totality. Liberalism means that. Democracy in the sense that it's self-changing. It's not absolute. It corrects itself. It develops over time. It questions itself. So it's not science, but it's a politics of doubt, a politics of uncertainty, a politics of growth, moving toward justice as a result of debate. So I call it liberal social democracy, because it's aiming for a social democracy, but it's liberal insofar as individual citizens are respected in their own voice. And no one is absorbed into the system. Anyway, so that's the gigantic picture of the ethics. Yes?
So we have taken two ideas here. One is ethical and another is justice. My relationship with the other, the singular relationship is ethical, because I am limitlessly responsible to the other.
Yes.
And when I am limitlessly responsible to other, I have to substitute myself in other's place, and I am then a hostage of the other.
Yeah.
Then my relationship with the third party cannot be ethical one, because I can substitute my life only once, and I am infinitely
Yes.
into. There is so it is a relationship of singularity, and it is not a general theory of ethics for humanity. That is what the conclusion we are getting from the nothing.
That it's not what?
No, not a general theory of ethics.
It's a quest for justice that never loses sight of its moral responsibility for the one in front of it. So it's, well, what did they want to call it in America for a while? Conservative? What was the thing they said about the Bush senior? Kind conservative?
You are conservative.
No, compassionate.
Compassionate conservatism. But this would be more like compassionate socialism, I think. But if you were Levinasian and you had a conservative bent, you would call it compassionate conservatism. Because I'm saying that they agree in the principles, they disagree in the policy, so I can't just write them off. They are looking for a just society. They have a very different vision of it, and I think they would lose an argument if they were willing to argue on equal terms with me, but I can't decide this beforehand. But yes, that would be... so justice, I say, is a rectification of morality, in that sense that Aristotle, as I earlier referred to, speaks of decency as the discrimination in the case that doesn't cohere to the universal rule, doesn't cohere to the law. So that's why we have courthouses instead of machines to decide legal cases, because you need to be in front of human beings who have discretion, who can decide, how does this case fit this law? Now, we know the system tends to sclerosize, so it tends to make rules where it shouldn't. So that in America, what they did for, and I'm sure in every country they're doing things like this, and crimes having to do with drugs, they would just set the sentencing so that the judge wouldn't have discrimination, because the judges were being compassionate. Or they would do, if this is your second offense, then you must go to jail for this number. And these are making rules where you can't make rules, but the system tends to coagulate. So let me, before we take a break, because maybe today there's so much I want to say, let me just give you the temporal characterization of the same thing. Because Levinas uses this language as one of the difficulties of his text. He's interweaving 4 different levels of language about the same thing. So the ethical we've talked about, and we'll come back to it, because that's essential, it's crucial, everything's determined by it, the system collapses without it. The temporal characterization is the diachrony, right? The diachrony, which is a term opposed to synchrony, but it's also a term opposed to dialectic, right? So synchrony keeps the chrony, the time, but dialectic, you keep the dia. So you put chronos, time, there instead of lectic, the speaking. So temporally, we have to talk about diachrony, the dephasing, 2 times that are not the same time. The other is also an instant that has self-presence in its ecstatic form, right? Because the other has interiority that is, I am not privy to. The other has their own time. So when I encounter the you, that has, in a sense, already passed for the other. The face that I face is you think of it in terms of stars. We sometimes say that the light we're seeing from stars has already, this is just an illustration, that star may already be dead. The face you face has already passed before you encounter it. You're always coming into it too late. It has its needs already. It has its requirements already. It is obligating you in a way that you've already not fulfilled. So you're always too late for the other one.
The face is always the trace of the face.
The trace is always only the trace of the face. So the line coming down is already. It's already happened. The line going up is too late. I'm too late. That's the moral structure. But what it is I'm too late for is the future. The future is the others. The future is the he, that is the justice that is not yet in place. When I am too late for the other, I'm already too late morally, but even more than that, even more pressing, I'm too late for the system of justice that we have not, I'm too late. We're saying it hasn't arrived yet. The future of the system of justice that will enable me to be good to the other without hurting others has not yet arrived. So that messianic future is now, the future comes because I have not yet established the system of justice. So the radical sense of future, of which all senses of future are derived in this new intersubjective theory of time, is the justice that has not yet occurred. That is, you cannot think, according to Levinas, of any future more future than the justice that has not yet occurred. And which could be an interesting way to read that phrase that I said, that this guy took from the book that Jameson used, that everyone has heard, that it's easier to imagine the end of the universe than the end of capitalism. I have yet to meet a person who can imagine the end of capitalism. I can't. I cannot imagine the end of it. I don't even have an imaginative idea of the end of capitalism. So Levinas is saying, let's think of that sort of thing temporally. if I think of what future can I now, I can think of the end of the universe. I have no problem. Like you said, planet Earth can do without us. We're all dead. You know, tsunamis, earthquakes, cosmic rays coming from outer space, whatever it is, some virus we don't know about. Yeah, I even imagine the planet blowing up. Imagine the universe blowing up. Big Bang retreating in reverse. It's simple to imagine the end of the universe, but I can't imagine the end of capitalism.
I think it is possible. We spoke about it, so I will be repeating myself. I mean, all those anarchist ideas which are out there, I'm not saying they're viable, I'm just saying, well, it's a product of imagination, you know. Even or communism, you know, communist utopias, they are the options, you know, of what it's going to be. What I think you mean, but that also applies then to the end of the universe, is that we are so entrenched in capitalism at the moment that it's really hard to see the trigger for the change.
I can't think of the trigger either, but I can't think of I can't think of the link that binds a policy, such as you were suggesting, the anarchists have come up with, Marx came up with various policies to get us to the end. I can't imagine the link between that policy and this principle of absolute justice, namely, I could be fully moral without any injustice. So that all of these descriptions, I don't actually see that connection. I mean, at a very abstract level, at the level of principle, we do know the principle we're aiming at. But in terms of getting from here to there, so it's not just a spark, it's like I don't see the connection. I can just see the directions. Which one move me closer to that, which ones don't. So like, for me, having national health care is like a no-brainer that moves us in that direction. But there are many, as you know, in America, people who oppose that, and they're winning. So
yeah, but that's the thing.
So you're
what
right.
you just said, I think it's not the trigger, maybe the preconditions are difficult to see how the capitalism will run its course. That it's more difficult, but to imagine that it ends and what will be an alternative, I think there are possible.
I think maybe I'm causing the problem here, because it's not so much the end of capitalism I'm really having a problem with. It's to end the hegemony and imperialism of capitalism. That is, capitalism might be a fine economic system. It might be the system at the end. I don't know. But I want to preserve family life. I want to preserve a political life. And I see capitalism taking over all of these things. So maybe it's easier to imagine the end of the universe than limiting capitalism. Maybe that's the problem. I don't see how to limit capitalism.
Yeah, that's much more interesting.
Yeah. So
all the anarchists, that's what they're saying. You want only the good side, and that's what's not going to happen. That's why we have to abolish the state as well.
yeah, I know.
And then, yeah, most of us, they say, oh, no. Yes.
So the temporal structure here is at the level of phileity, at the level of the justice, when we said anterior, I put temporal terms on this general structure. The anterior is actually the other obligating me. That is always anterior. By essence, by essence, you don't even have essence, but it's interior. That's interiority itself. That dephasing, the diaphragm, not too late, the already. But the posterior part is necessary so that I can try to set up a system that allows the anteriority. So the thing is to set up a political system that enables the trace of the face. Right? And again, that's why I said Levinas will explicitly say liberal democracy, meaning what I believe he means liberal social democracy. So temporally, this is the structure of anterior posteriority, which occurs everywhere. One last thing, and we'll take a break, and I'll come back and do a couple more levels. No, I don't need to do that. So I'm saying that instant, the time of postponement, is precisely what gets anteriorized temporally by contact with the obligation of the other. And then it cannot regroup itself. There's no regrouping. You're out of phase with yourself. It cannot be put together. Right? Why? Because the other is in you. The other has, well, we'll talk about it in the body. So let's take a break. I'll come back. We'll do body, then we'll do language. But I think it's very helpful to sort out these things. And Levinas, it often seems like he's just using this vocabulary, you know, and just throwing it on top of each other. But it's the layers. Okay.